They say that when you're about to die, your whole life flashes before your eyes as though it were a film. Well, being Latin American and all, I can't say I'm looking forward to that moment. Are you telling me that not only am I going to die, but I'm gonna have to watch some depressing, self-indulgent, independent film with shitty production values? I imagine though that it's not really going to be a film about your whole life. It's probably going to be more like a highlight reel or something. And although I made a You Old Gamer Recommends video on Defend the Rook, and that's the most heightened honor a game can get.
Bullshit.
When the time comes for me to go down in a blaze of glory a la John Marston, cause that's how I see it happening, Defend the Rook is probably not going to be on that last minute film, but Tainted Grail Conquest just might. Welcome to another episode of
You Old Gamer Recommends.
But Alex, what about Temple of Elemental Evil?
Coming. He said it's coming now.
But today we are going to be talking about Tainted Grail Conquest, a roguelite action RPG with card-based combat mechanics that takes place in an Arthurian dark fantasy setting. And when I say dark, I'm talking dark. Like Dark Souls 3 meets Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice dark. The creep factor, the feeling of desolation, the Kafkian anguish that comes from the fact that everything's lost. These are things that games that take place in dark fantasy settings just have to get right. And Tainted Grail Conquest nails all of it. And I have nothing but respect and admiration for developers and writers who weave immersive narratives around the concept of uncertainty and the lingering feeling that everything's fucked up and that it will continue to be fucked up regardless of what you do, but you have no choice but to try and unfuck it. Tainted Grail is an indie game that's way more epic and memorable than it has any right to be. I originally thought it was going to be one of those blank wall games, a palate cleanser of sorts to stare at between real games. But what started off as taking a break from serious gaming eventually became an obsession, and it did so for all the right reasons. Forget about any ranking system. This is the real score. These are the real indicators that a game is awesome. First, I'm going to play for 30 minutes before hitting the sack, he said. 30 minutes? I played that shit for 6 hours, and I did so every day I played this game. Second, every time I stopped playing the game, I went to bed looking forward to the next gaming session. Third, I couldn't stop talking about it. Fourth, even after I completed the story and saw the credits roll, I kept coming back for more. But why? So Tainted Grail starts with this little cheerful introduction.
King Arthur promised us safety on these shores. Instead, we found stormy seas, rocks like shark teeth, and treacherous mists. Those few who manage to land will be set by hunger, cold, and nightmares born of weirdness. My people settled around a gnarled old statue. Though we did not understand its origin or purpose, the enemy seemed to avoid it. That was good enough. For a time. In the end, the winds of weirdness only grew stronger, and the statue failed to protect the settlement. There was fear, despair, and then nothingness, as reality melted around us.
It's brief but powerful. It tells you exactly what you need to know about the setting in which this whole deal takes place, and also a little bit about yourself and your last moment's life. It raises questions like, what the hell's the weirdness? What exactly do you mean by nothingness? And how, and more importantly, why did that statue protect your settlement? It doesn't look the protecting kind. Also, why did it eventually fail? And I don't know about you guys, but I was immediately hooked and looking forward to finding the answers to these questions. The next thing you know is that you're not alive anymore, but also not exactly dead either. You're in a dark limbo, caught between death and the afterlife. You don't know how you got there, you don't know what you have to do to get through your predicament, and worse yet, you don't know if there is anything that you can do to escape it. It would seem like you are condemned to this new non-existence to which there is no possibility of redemption or no end. That's some pretty hardcore Kafkian shit you've gotten yourself into, eh? But then out of nowhere, this lovely creature emerges to shed light upon your present situation, and it even gives you a few pointers about how to make things right again. But to say that his explanation about your current situation is cryptic would be like saying that some of you weren't thrilled with my criticism about Pathfinder's character creation mechanics. And you would think,
aha! Plot convenient bullshit right there. This guy, the thing, Tells you just what you need to do so that you go out there and do it, but not enough for you to piece together the who's, the what's, and the why's of your current situation, thus artificially forcing a sense of mystery into the whole deal.
And that's not how it is at all, Strawman. Not in the least. According to this creature, getting your ticket out of this miasma involves killing some, whatever these things are. But unless you're a single-digit IQ TikTok user, that's gonna raise questions like, what is this guy not telling me? Could he be manipulating me into doing his own dirty work? What's the other side of the story? But because you have no other choice, off you go into the world of adventures to set things right. The game starts in this deserted village at the center of which there's this lovely inspiring menhir. Wait a minute. This feels awfully familiar, doesn't it? It's like the settlement from the intro. When exactly did the events of the intro take place? Am I reliving my last days alive? Is this a second opportunity of sorts? Is it a parallel reality? A loop, perhaps? Is it all of these things at the same time? Whatever the case may be, it immediately becomes clear that the menhir keeps the fogs of weirdness at bay, protecting your settlement for the time being. There's an empty smithy that looks like it could use a blacksmith, and various shops that look like they could use some vendors. There's also one other person already in the village. He doesn't seem to know much, but his situation is not too different from your own, so at least you're not alone in this. Time to do the goat's bidding then. But as soon as you set foot outside your settlement's walls, you get a taste of this weirdness everyone's been talking about. And I think the game does a phenomenal job at presenting it as an encroaching fog of nothingness and, well, weirdness. You've been given a few weird candles, special candles that keep you safe from the fog. But beyond the candle's light, everything looks blurry, dark, twisted, sinister. This adds a great deal of immersion and also a hefty dose of anxiety, because you don't have enough candles to explore the entire area and they burn out really fast. You don't die if you walk into the weirdness without a weird candle, but it's also not something you want to be doing early on in the game. But as you explore this first area of the game, you'll come face to face with the one thing you did pay the price of the admission for: creepy ass monsters. Combat in Tainted Grail Conquest is card based, and it's pretty fucking awesome. Its mechanics are simple and intuitive, but even if you are a Magic the Gathering, Hearthstone, or Gwent seasoned veteran, you'll find the challenge here to be not neglectable. The combat in Tainted Grail sticks to the principle of easy to learn and hard to master, but it's always challenging. Because it's a roguelite, you're meant to play it several times. The first times you play, the game will only demand from you that you understand its basic mechanics and the approach to the class you're currently playing. It'll also help if you figure out a few tactics and if you get decent cards, but that's about it. But there's also runes, consumables, and permanent boosts and enhancements to play around with in Tainted Grail Conquest. And as you play in higher and higher difficulty levels, these things start to become important because the game gets so challenging that it starts demanding that you also use these other things smartly. And that means as part of your strategic design. There are classes to be unlocked in Tainted Grail, 9 to be precise, and they are all as delightfully diverse as you might wish from the strategic and tactical point of view. You can't choose all of them from the get-go, but that's okay though, you'll be unlocking them in no time. Luckily for me, the Summoner was one of the first unlockable classes, and I am a sucker for summoning. I just love when others do my dirty work for me. And though combat in Tainted Grail is card-based, I felt like my experience with other summoning classes in other real-time combat ARPGs was fairly useful here. The secret is to understand what the right approach for every class is, or at least every class that you're interested in. For example, trying to obliterate your enemies as quickly as possible might be a good idea when you're a weird hunter, but if you play as a Pathfinder, then it's
not a great plan.
Generally. Every time you level, you get to choose one card out of 3 possible choices, and every other level, you also get to choose a passive skill. And because Tainted Grail is a roguelite, it's a bit like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're gonna get. This means that you need to understand full well the possibilities of your class of choice, because if you start a run and you play as though you're going to get exactly the cards and passives that you need to get your preferred tactic working, well, I have bad news for you, sunshine. In this game, you have to be like a good football coach. You need to have an understanding of your team and a general strategy that makes the most out of its strengths. But your tactics have to be flexible enough to put up with different challenges efficiently. There's also a decent variety of enemies with different strengths and weaknesses. This could have been a little better, especially considering the many runs you'll have to go through before you complete the game's main goal, but it's good enough as it is. I like that on the same difficulty level, some monsters feel as complete pushovers when you're playing some classes, but they are nigh impossible to defeat when you play some others, and I think this speaks volumes of how well designed character classes are in this game. Every run you're supposed to defeat 3 bosses to unlock one of 2 possible final boss encounters. One of them you can reach by simply defeating every boss in each of the game's 3 main areas. These areas, as well as its boss encounters, are procedurally generated, and again, some bosses are significantly harder to defeat than others depending on the class you play. The other boss is a secret boss of sorts, and you can unlock it by retrieving the other boss's hearts. And there's also some high-risk, high-reward encounters against treasure guardians. These are the real boss encounters in my opinion. You may skip these encounters, but they have phenomenal loot that might actually make the difference between losing later on or actually completing the run successfully. But Tainted Grail Conquest would have not gotten much more than a thumbs up and a community post recommendation, at least for me, if combat had been the only thing worth mentioning about it. But this one also comes packed with a beefy, juicy side order of lore and superb writing. By means of its dark setting and its angst-ridden Kafkian narrative, Tainted Grail delivers immersion and gravitas. It nails the mystery aspect of the game, and it uses it to tease you into completing the game's main objective, and I think that is quite remarkable for a roguelite. Throughout the game you'll encounter characters who are wandering about aimlessly in the weirdness. Unlike you, most of them seem oblivious to the fact that they are trapped in limbo and that the world they used to live in is no longer around. They are stuck in pointless pursuits of goals that might have made sense when they were still alive, but to which there is no point now that they are gone. You can invite some of these people to come over to your village, and they will provide valuable services to you going forward, but they will also ask you to help them with matters of their past. You'd think that no longer being alive, and wandering about in a limbo that will also soon be consumed by nothingness, there would be little point in trying to make amends. But for the people you encounter in this game, that's not the case. Whatever lies ahead, whatever threshold there is for them to cross, they want to come to terms with their guilt before they cross it. And that is what Tainted Grail is ultimately all about. Living in guilt is living in hell. And this is what the weirdness is meant to represent in Tainted Grail, a hell that people brought upon themselves. And man, there's more angles to the theme of guilt in Tainted Grail than in Christopher Nolan's entire filmography. There are those who live in guilt because their poor judgment caused pain and suffering to others, those who were manipulated into feeling guilt, those who could only escape their terrible situation by committing atrocious deeds and now feel guilty because of it. I am very impressed at how the developers and writers of Tainted Grail used this surreal limbo they called the weirdness as a freestyle canvas of sorts that allowed them to make some pretty brutal and straightforward representations of the many faces of guilt. There's the Elder Archer whose legs end in roots that stretch into the ground and form a bonfire, because I guess guilt is a gnarled root that won't let go and it's always burning, or the huge abomination who walks about with people sticking out of its belly, because in life he used to be a despicable person who gained notoriety by claiming other people's merits as his own. It's brutally honest and on point, but not in an on-the-nose way. It's not like these other games written by people with IQ below room temperature who think their audience is as dumb as they are, and turn their characters and narrators into exposition and information dump machine guns. But there's something stoic and old-fashioned about the characters and their stories in Tainted Grail. They speak and look and reason as though they belong in this dark fantasy world. There's no teenage angst, no victimization, no one's wearing their guilt like a badge to farm sympathy, no one's acting as though they're entitled to anything, no one's slighting in arguments about how terrible the world's been to them to justify their actions, there's no finger pointing. Every character in this story is deeply flawed, but also valuable and worthy of redemption. And to those who aren't, you can only meet when you travel the weirdness without a weird candle, because they are truly too far gone. And if I'm honest with you, I find this noteworthy because flawed characters who have real problems and who deal with them like grown-ups would feel like a dying breed these days in entertainment. Not many games have the capacity to make me reflect upon my past mistakes and actions, but fuck me, this game had me wrapped around its fingers since the get-go. I won't spoil anything to you this time, but god I want to so badly. I'll just say this character's story and this character's story reduced me to tears. But just so that you get an idea of the level of writing we're talking about here, I'll just spoil this tiny bit. There's this passage in which you meet this character, and you can ask him to give you something that you are going to need, but that you still don't know that you are going to need. And the guy gives you a noose. I'll leave it at that. There's also lots of Arthurian legends, fables, and their morals woven into the fabric of the story, and if you know your fables, you'll be happy to know that there are some situations in which this knowledge will go a long way. The main quest in the last stretch of the game is to save every soul that can be saved. That entails helping everyone through their own personal hells. When you are going through hell, keep going. The subtext is as simple as it is universally true. You save yourself from hell when you help others save themselves. And although this is not that kind of review, I'd also like to touch upon Tainted Grail's production values. Make no mistake about it, this is no AAA title by any means, but sometimes it feels like it punches way above its weight. Enemies may not be on the same level as those in Dark Souls 3, but they certainly rank high in the creep factor. Level design is also competent and clever. These people clearly didn't have the budget to design intricate, lengthy dungeons, but they played to their strengths, and the few locations that you do get add to the immersion aspect of the game phenomenally. Also, navigating the weirdness without a weird candle can give you a severe case of crap in the pants. Animations and sound effects are also fantastic in Tainted Grail Conquest. There's not too much diversity in the sound effect department, but the sounds that you do get are absolutely phenomenal. Voice acting, with some unfortunate exceptions like this guy, is spot on and consistent with the game's dark tone and its Kafkian vibes.
Hello, my friend.
It's strange. He looks the same, yet his eyes have changed. And so has his voice.
I told you we'd meet again. Yes, the last time we met, I was nothing but a memory, wandering between planes of this corrupted reality, but it looks like somebody has given me a new body.
This is actually very impressive, guys, and it's almost 100% voiced. And there's a lot of narration and dialogue lines here. And last but not least, there's the music. Tainted Grail has its share of sinister, dark, Celtic vibes with all the runes, the menhirs, and the creepy demons with antlers a la Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice. And the music is the perfect fit. This is one badass soundtrack that fits the pack like a glove. My favorite are the raspy, macabre, druidic chants like Araxore crime ergiv arsai clotor. I don't think I did it justice, so let's listen to it for a bit. Well, I got the Clothar part right. Nah, but seriously guys, this is one of the most
amazing
soundtracks that has come out in many years. I'll leave a link to it in the description section down below, because this one's worth listening to even if you're not interested in playing the game. Tainted Grail pretty much beat the crap out of my every expectation, but there are a few things that will probably keep it from making it to the top 10 of this decade. Wait, was it that good? Well, yes, and no. Let's talk about the things that I didn't like, and let's start with the nitpicks. The first of which is the map. I can't believe this guys thought it was a good idea to put the map exactly where it's most intrusive and annoying. Also, you can buy a perk from the candle maker in your village to reveal the location of every NPC, and another one that reveals the location of every building and landmark in the game. But it's almost impossible to see which locations and NPCs you got this run without doing some pretty fucked up mouse gymnastics. And trust me, by the end of the game, you're going to want to do this. We'll get into why a little bit later. These guys are also in dire need of a graphic designer with UX design experience. The font they chose for some of the in-game text and tooltips is atrocious, and while it never interferes with the actual functionalities, it looks crude to the point of being a little immersion breaking. There's also this tiny detail when you're choosing cards and passive skills, and it's that the game doesn't provide any audio or visual cue to let you know that you effectively clicked on the continue or skip or add button, and that adds a 0.1 stress that we could have done without. And here are the main gripes that I have with the game, although I understand that all of them are about valid design choices that may or may not be to your liking. First, I'm not entirely sure about how I feel about the fact that they went for the roguelite model for this game. It must be cost efficient. This model requires a handful of locations, buildings, and character models, and it allows developers to add a great deal of replay value in a cost-efficient way. And it's the perfect model for games like Defend the Rook. After all, this game is all about clearing waves after waves of enemies in a 9x9 grid, and its replay value comes from procedurally generated enemies, loot, and skill combos, and it's fine. And I even feel like the combat in Tainted Grail benefits from this model to some extent. But what makes Tainted Grail stand out in the crowd is its rich, intricate lore, the superb quality of its writing, and the masterful treatment of its main theme. And you engage in this by starting quests that have 2, 3, or 4 parts, quests in which there are even some decisions to be made. In games that are all about questing like Disco Elysium, or even in games that aren't entirely about questing but are notorious for their superb quest design like Planescape Torment, when you pick a quest, especially if it's well written, you tend to follow that thread all the way to the end. or at least you go as far as the game lets you. And I find this endlessly enjoyable because you have control over which quest to follow and for how long. But because Tainted Grail follows the roguelite model, this control is taken away from the player. You don't get to decide which quests to follow because even story-based encounters are randomly generated. This means that quest progression depends on whether or not the game procedurally generates the next quest-related encounter. I know that Tainted Grail is supposed to be first and foremost about its combat, but with this model, the game's story and its lore get a little bit trivialized and reduced to an excuse to add purpose to the combat. And it's a pity because it's pretty fucking awesome. One additional problem that comes with the roguelite model, when the game's story and its quests are important, is that as you near the end of the game, you start running out of story-based things to do. So while you'll be advancing 3 or 4 quest lines per run during your first few playthroughs, by the end of the game, you might be needing 3 or 4 playthroughs to complete one quest line. And I can't say I'm a fan of this. And second, I have one major issue with the game's ending. This is a very minor spoiler, as I won't be telling you how it ends, but I will be telling you what I think is wrong with it. As I've said before, the best thing about Tainted Grail is the way in which it treats its characters and their stories. It's clever and thought-provoking, and it treats its main theme in a sober and respectful way. And I especially appreciate that the game didn't connect the dots or interpret the story for me. Until the end, that is, when a certain character decided to slap me in the face with the most information-dumpy explanation about everything that could actually be explained. Every bit of juice that I had already milked out of the story was explained to me as though I were your average TikTok user or a social justice activist. Was I disappointed? A little bit. Did this undo the fun I had throughout the game? Absolutely not. I even came back for more 3 or 4 times after I finished the game. Tainted Grail Conquest beat the crap out of every expectation I had before I walked into it. Combat was way better than I expected, story and lore were galaxies better than I expected, it challenged my strategic and tactical mindset, I felt like the challenge scaled beautifully as I progressed through the game, it's packed with tons of food for thought that's elegantly and eloquently put together, and the artistic merit of the way in which it conveys its story and their morals is off the charts, guys. I didn't expect a game like this to come out in 2021, and it was a breath of fresh air. If card games are your thing, get it. If ARPGs are your thing, get it. If Arthurian dark fantasy, fables, or just decent storytelling are your things, get it. You can do a lot worse for $20. I have only one more word for you guys. Clodar. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, thank you for watching all the way up until now. If you like what you're seeing in this channel, please consider subscribing and clicking that notification bell to avoid the usual YouTube shenanigans. Share the video, but most importantly, never stop gaming, but don't let gaming get in the way of your hopes and dreams. Bye everyone.